a manner of speaking, just hours ago on Friday afternoon, the Parliament tabled the GST Constitutional Amendment Bill. Now, it's a bill that makes important concessions to states. Alcohol have been kept out of GST, and petroleum products are in yet out. That is, they will not be subject to GST till further notification. Compensation to states may now extend to 5 years. And there's a twist in the tail. For 2 years, an up to 1% tax will be levied on goods by the centre and assigned to states. You know what they say about well begun and half done? Well, today we find out whether this version of the GST is well begun or in fact half undone. And joining me to do that, Lakshmi Kumaran of Lakshmi Kumaran and Sridharan and Rajiv Dimri of BMR. Gentlemen, to both of you, a warm welcome. Mr. Lakshmi Kumaran, let me start first with the sticky issue of petroleum products, right? The fact is that the Constitutional Amendment Bill makes a mention of them, but there will be no GST levy on them. Which petroleum products are we talking about specifically, and what does all of this mean for those particular industries?
Petroleum products, in this case, what we are talking about is motor spirit, that is petrol, kerosene, diesel, ATF, etc. The state revenue on these petroleum product sales is considerable, and they don't want to give it as a VAT at this point of time.
Right.
So what the proposal is, levy the existing taxes on petrol, like in the case of excise, we charge normally, like VAT will be being charged, sales tax will be charged. So normal existing levies on petroleum products will continue, and they will not get into the GST chain. All other products are in the GST chain. And therefore, these two products, namely the petroleum products, will ultimately get into the GST chain after 2 years or 3 years as they came levy.
Okay.
So therefore, it is not as though petroleum products are zero rated. It is not as though they are not going to be levied at all. They will be levied the existing levies, both excise and the sales tax, local taxes, etc., interstate sale, all those things as it is going on today, it will continue. And they will be brought into the GST net after 2-3 years, when the states are comfortable.
So they're in GST, but they're in suspended animation.
Exactly.
Rajiv, I think what we were trying to understand is when you say petroleum products, as Mr. Lakshmi Kumaran has pointed out, it seems to refer to only 5 products. It does not apply to all the derivatives of petroleum products, which is where the fear lay, right? Because this is a big input in all industry. So it won't apply to tires or paints or anything like that. It only applies to the sale of these products, which in itself is, as you were pointing out in a conversation to me before, a very B2C situation as opposed to a B2B situation. The fear was that if you don't bring petroleum products in, does the supply chain of all other industries that use petroleum products as an input get impacted by this?
So I agree with you. There are 2 points that I wanted to make. One, the policy of exclusion of these specific petroleum products has been around since 2005. So there is no change in either the list or the thought around it.
Okay.
As Mr. Lakshmi Kumaran indicated, that it is an extremely high component of revenue for each state, and everybody is concerned about it. Again, to name the products, it is crude, it is high-speed diesel, it is petrol, it is aviation turbine fuel, and it is natural gas. Of which crude, aviation turbine fuel, and natural gas is actually an industrial input, largely for power and for petrol products, and therefore, that high taxes will continue. It's the diesel and petrol, which is, somewhat you and I consume it for our cars, and of course that's not the only application. But it is a revenue implication that is keeping it out, and that policy has remained that way since 2005 or even prior. But it is not going to impact what your concern was, that is impact plastic industry and tire industry. No, that will remain part and parcel of a normal manufacturing industry and inside GST.
So Rajiv, what does that mean in fact for industries such as power that use these as fuel?
Well, power is outside of GST, and therefore any fuel that they go, whether they take natural gas, whether they take any other form of fuel, crude of course doesn't go to power, that will go to refinery. And today there are concessionals available to power industry because it all fuel cost adds to the power tariff, and those details will emerge as and when the draft laws and the rate schedule will come out. But one thing is clear, that the power industry is outside of GST.
So is the refining industry then? So is the refining industry then?
Well, refining industry in itself is not. So if crude comes into a refinery, and if refinery comes out with 20, 30 different products, only 5 products are excluded. Everything else is part of regular GST.
Is this the best way we could have done this?
In fact, there's the only way. Now, not the best way. The only way they could have done it. There is a difference between petroleum products and petrochemicals. In fact, apart from petrol, you have got a product called raw naphtha. Raw naphtha is the main raw material for the production of petrochemicals. That is not kept out of GST. It is part of GST.
Okay, fine.
So therefore, that chain continues. Okay. Only petrol is taken out.
Would there be any difference in the incidence of tax on, let's say, the petrol and diesel that you and I buy to run our cars?
Should not. Because the existing level will continue.
So you're saying this is the only way we could have proceeded on GST? Okay. This is not a half-baked GST. This is not a flawed GST design.
No, you see, ideally all of them should have been in.
Right.
But India is now trying to get into the GST in a phased manner. They don't know what is going to happen, how much the revenue loss, etc. Since the center is also promising to compensate the states where there is a loss of the revenues because of the GST introduction. So they want to move cautiously. So therefore, they take into account the concerns of the state governments, and they say, all right, we'll keep this major revenue earner for you out of the scheme for the present. Learn from this experience next 2-3 years how the GST functions. By the time we'll get much more statistics as to how we can deal with the petroleum products, and then we can introduce it.
Okay, so you brought up the issue of compensation, and it does seem that the centre has made a considerable giveaway to the state by agreeing to an almost 5-year period of compensation as opposed to the earlier position of 3 years. Yeah. Is it a big giveaway?
Not at all. Not at all. Once you fix the blended rate for the GST regime, and I am sure the government, the parliament and all state governments are going to fix a rate which will be slightly higher than the existing one so that nobody wants to lose the revenue. I don't think there is going to be any big loss to the state governments at all.
Or the centre.
Or the centre.
Okay.
You and I are going to pay for it. That's fine. But the state the state governments are blocking the entire thing because of the components are not being part of the constitutional amendment, etc. Okay. So therefore, the centre is given away not only 3-5 years.
Yeah. So that should help to bring all the states on board with this move. Okay. The one twist in the tail, though, Rajiv, is this interesting 1% additional tax. The bill says levy of an additional tax on supply of goods not exceeding 1% in the course of interstate trade or commerce to be collected by the Government of India for a period of 2 years and assigned to the states from where the supply originates. Where has this come from? What does it mean? And again, what does it mean from the larger point of view of the design of a GST?
Well, this design is clearly against the notion of GST because we are trying to get away from this origin base of tax, and therefore CST is to be phased out. This is nothing but a backdoor entry for CST. What is not clear to me is, so while I understand the revenue compulsion that this is to protect the revenue of the states which are going to lose CST, what is not clear is whether this additional tax of 1%, while it says for 2 years, but there is also a provision which allows the GST Council to extend the period of 2 years. So there is, some stretchability in that. What I would be most curious to know as the details emerge is this a tax which is available as credit to the taxpayer? In which case, it is more a matter of compensation between the center and state and one state and another, but doesn't impact the tax flow to the taxpayer. But if it is going to be a non-creditable tax, then it is continuation of CST just by another name. And that would be regressive.
Basically, if you look at the existing tax regime, there is something called goods originating state and consuming state.
Yeah.
Originating state, as of now, they are collecting what the central sales tax. That goes to the particular state. In the case of GST, the tax ultimately gets consumed in the consuming state. So the originating state lose that money.
Right.
So therefore, the originating state who are contributing to the exchequer, they are now worried whether they will lose their money at all. So therefore, as a temporary measure, again a bargain by the central state, okay, I will charge 1% extra for the interstate sale and give this money back to you, the originating states, so that you are not immediately worried about your loss of revenue at this point of time, but come to the table, let us now work together.
Will it get a credit, as Rajiv was pointing out?
They will.
It will. So from a taxpayer and assessee point of view, it's not of big impact.
Yeah.
But from a state point of view, at least they get that assured additional revenue, so to speak.
Because that goes to them straight away.
Okay. So I have come to my final question then. So how prepared are companies for GST? Because nobody expected or nobody was sure when exactly this regime will take off.
See, at this point of time, they must know now that excise and various additional components of excise, additional duty of excise, etc., will all go away. And so also, number of state levies. Many finance ministers are very innovative in introducing new types of levies. All those things will get subsumed. Now, there will be one common market in India. Now, what the companies have to do now at this point of time will be wait for the actual GST law. This only constitutional amendment is merely the guidelines. In terms of this constitutional amendment, the state government and the parliament have to now legislate. When you legislate, and the rules, regulations, and those things have to be necessarily gone through in great detail. And many companies have to necessarily relook at their method of supply chain and also the vendor chain, and whether in this GST regime, whether what they've been doing till now is the right way of doing, or they should tweak something to complete their supply chain management properly so that they get the maximum advantage of the GST.
Rajiv, are you happy? Are you happy with this GST design?
Well, the way I look at it is that what will happen on April 1, 2016 is the process of implementation of GST. This is not the end of implementation of GST, as Mr. Lakshmi Kumaran also mentioned. Over time, a lot of things have to come into it. We're still, while entry taxes is in it, we still have to deal with octroi and other things. What happens to real estate? What happens to stamp duties and other taxes? We still have to deal with 2-3 years later petroleum getting into it. So April 1, 2016 is the beginning of the process of GST introduction in India and not the end of that process.
Well, this is just the beginning of our coverage as well. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me today.